Pirates ate some of the weirdest foods to survive at sea. From crawling critters to slimy sea creatures, these 20 meals kept them alive when nothing else would. Which of these strange foods actually made it onto a pirate's menu? One of the first surprises, eels. Slippery underwater snakes, pirates grabbed them with bare hands whenever hunger outweighed common sense. These long, snake-like fish lurked near coastlines and became floating protein bars for desperate sailors. Getting a grip on something covered in more slime than a sneeze was like trying to hold onto a wet bar of soap during an earthquake. Pirates used basic hooks, sharp sticks, or just their hands to snatch these creatures from shallow waters during nighttime hunting trips. Preparation was messy work that left everyone covered in eel slime. The skin had to come off completely, which meant gripping these creatures with rough cloth while scraping away layers of protective mucus. Most crews threw eel pieces over open flames, turning the deck into a smoky barbecue pit. What made it worthwhile was the nutritional payoff. Eel meat packed more fat and protein than most other sea creatures, providing energy that lasted for hours of hard work. While other fish might fill your stomach temporarily, eel meat stuck around like a good friend who actually helps you move furniture. Pirates valued eels because they were predictable and reliable. Unlike hunting larger sea creatures that required luck and dangerous equipment, eel fishing was a skill anyone could learn with practice. Of course, slippery eels were just one challenge. Dealing with creatures that actively tried to stab you was another story entirely. Sea urchins looked like underwater pincushions having a bad day, but pirates saw these spiky creatures as bite-sized snacks attached to rocks and floating debris near coastal waters. One careless move, and you'd end up looking like you tried to pet a cactus while blindfolded. Pirates learned to crack the shells carefully, avoiding the needle-sharp spines while accessing the soft meat inside using sharp knives and steady hands. Collection was relatively easy during stops near rocky shores. Pirates used knives to pry urchins loose from ship hulls and rocks, then cracked them open like spiky eggs. The meat inside was small, strange, and definitely an acquired taste. Most pirates described the flavor as concentrated ocean with a texture that challenged even empty stomachs. Raw sea urchin had a consistency somewhere between pudding and slime. Many crews mixed urchin meat into whatever stew was bubbling, hoping other ingredients would mask the unusual flavor. Think of them as ocean vitamins that happened to live in spiky armor rather than bottles. You needed dozens to make any real difference in hunger levels, but they were everywhere in certain regions. Sea urchins required no special hunting skills or expensive equipment. Any pirate with a knife could gather enough for the crew during coastal stops. The spikes were annoying, but at least sea urchins didn't look like something that had crawled out of a nightmare. Sea cucumbers were sausage-shaped ocean animals that crawled along coastlines, looking like someone had dropped hot dogs into the sea and forgotten to retrieve them. Imagine biting into what looks like a pickle and discovering it has the consistency of a wet leather glove. These weird creatures spent their lives filtering sand and debris from the ocean floor, which didn't make them taste like candy. Finding sea cucumbers was easy work since they moved slowly through shallow waters. Pirates could collect dozens during single stops. Fresh preparation involved slicing them open, cleaning out internal organs, and deciding whether to eat them raw or cooked. Raw sea cucumber had a texture that challenged even the hungriest sailors, feeling rubbery and slimy simultaneously. Cooking helped somewhat, but couldn't completely solve the texture problem. Dried sea cucumber told a different story. When properly preserved, these creatures transformed into concentrated nutrition that lasted weeks without spoiling. The drying process required patience and decent weather, but the result looked like brown leather packed with nutrients. Better still, pirates could carry pounds of preserved protein without taking up valuable storage space. This made sea cucumbers valuable emergency food that could be forgotten until desperately needed. At least, sea cucumbers stayed put when you tried to catch them. Some ocean creatures fought back with painful consequences. Jellyfish became meals only when everything else had run out, turning these floating blobs of pain into desperate protein sources for starving pirates who couldn't afford to be picky. Trying to eat something that wanted to hurt you seemed like a terrible idea, but empty stomachs make people consider terrible ideas pretty seriously. These translucent creatures were 99% water with stinging cells that kept fighting back even after death. Catching jellyfish was surprisingly easy since they moved slowly and couldn't escape nets or buckets. The real challenge was avoiding getting stung while trying to turn them into edible food. Boiling was absolutely required because raw jellyfish were dangerous to consume. Pirates cooked them until the stinging cells broke down completely. This process took forever and used precious fuel. What remained had the texture of overcooked noodles that someone had forgotten in water for several hours. Nutritionally, jellyfish provided almost nothing except psychological comfort of having something in your stomach. Preservation was impossible because jellyfish were mostly water. Once cooked, they had to be eaten immediately, or they would turn into inedible mush within hours. Even experienced pirates who regularly ate questionable things considered jellyfish gross enough to avoid unless facing genuine starvation. When the ocean failed to provide, pirates got creative with what they could find on their own ships. Sawdust became a bread ingredient when flour supplies dropped to dangerous levels, turning wood shavings into edible filler that stretched limited food stores through creative cooking mathematics. Adding wood chips to your sandwich wasn't a cooking mistake, it was survival engineering at its finest. When flour barrels looked emptier than a politician's promise, creative pirates discovered that sawdust could double their bread supply. The mixing process required careful attention to ratios. Too much sawdust made bread impossible to chew, while too little didn't solve the food shortage problem. Experienced cooks aimed for roughly 1 part sawdust to 3 parts flour. Meanwhile, pirates collected sawdust from ship repairs and woodworking projects. The finer the particles, the better they mixed with remaining flour supplies without creating obvious chunks that reminded everyone what they were eating. The final product looked brownish and felt gritty, like eating sandpaper that someone had baked into a loaf. The bread filled stomachs without providing real nutrition, functioning more like edible cardboard. Eating this creation required serious mental preparation. Pirates developed techniques for making it more tolerable, soaking pieces in water or any available broth to improve the texture. Predictably, digestive problems followed because human stomachs weren't designed to process wood fibers. Adding sawdust to bread was desperate, but sometimes the existing ingredients brought their own unwelcome surprises. Flour barrels on ships became breeding grounds for maggots that turned essential food supplies into squirming, protein-enhanced nightmares that had to be dealt with creatively. Opening a flour container and discovering it was moving on its own was nobody's idea of a pleasant surprise. Insects loved ship storage areas, laying eggs that hatched into hungry larvae that made themselves comfortable in the food supply. The separation process involved hours of careful sifting and picking through contaminated supplies. This recovered maybe half the original flour, assuming the infestation wasn't too severe. Pirates discovered something interesting about their uninvited protein guests. Maggots were actually edible and nutritious, turning spoiled flour into enhanced ingredients rather than total losses. Suddenly, bug-infested supplies became premium protein instead of ruined food stores. Baking eliminated most evidence of the unwanted additions while providing nutrition that plain flour couldn't offer. The heat killed disease risks while creating bread that looked relatively normal despite its unusual ingredient list. The psychological challenge was bigger than the practical one. Nobody woke up excited about maggot-enhanced baking, but empty stomachs don't care about ingredient lists when demanding food. Taste differences were subtle once everything was properly cooked. Hunger made excellent seasoning for just about anything edible. Dealing with tiny, unwanted protein was one thing, but pirates also had their sights set on much larger and more dangerous targets. Hunting sharks meant playing a deadly game where the prize was either weeks of food or becoming food yourself, requiring courage, skill, and weapons that could handle several hundred pounds of angry predator. Most sensible people swim away from sharks as fast as possible. Pirates grabbed harpoons and swam toward them with dinner plans. These massive fish provided enough meat to feed entire crews for weeks, making them extremely valuable targets despite obvious dangers. The hunting process started with spotting fins cutting through water near the ship. Harpoons had to be thrown with perfect accuracy because missing meant dealing with a wounded, angry shark thrashing around your boat. Ever tried lifting something that weighs as much as 3 grown men and really doesn't want to be lifted? Hauling sharks onto deck required the entire crew working with ropes, pulleys, and pure muscle power. Processing had to happen immediately before the meat spoiled. Pirates worked fast with sharp knives, carving steaks and strips while the flesh was still fresh. Salt preservation was crucial for maximizing the value of successful shark hunts. Shark liver was considered special food, though eating too much caused serious illness. Pirates learned through painful experience that moderation was essential. The effort was worth the risk because one successful shark hunt could solve food problems for weeks. While hunting massive predators was thrilling, sometimes the smallest morsels provided the most reliable sustenance. Ship hulls collected barnacles like teenagers collect excuses, creating underwater gardens of small, crunchy creatures that pirates saw as free protein growing on their transportation. Barnacles were basically ocean popcorn, except the popcorn lived in shells and tasted like concentrated salt water. These small crustaceans attached themselves to ships during long voyages, forming thick clusters that slowed vessels down. Removal served two purposes: improving ship speed and harvesting protein that required no hunting skills. Pirates used knives and scrapers to pry barnacles from hull surfaces during maintenance stops. Preparation was minimal, which made barnacles attractive when fuel was scarce. They could be eaten raw right after collection, though most pirates preferred boiling them briefly to improve texture. Eating barnacles was like consuming sunflower seeds, except the seeds lived underwater and made disturbing crunching sounds between your teeth. Each one provided maybe a mouthful of actual meat, meaning you needed dozens to make any difference. The shells cracked easily when cooked, revealing small amounts of meat inside. Nutritionally, barnacles offered protein plus salt and iodine that were often missing from limited ship diets. Having any food source that grew naturally on your ship provided psychological comfort during difficult times, knowing emergency protein was always available. Ship hulls weren't the only place pirates found unexpected meals. The sky above provided its own opportunities. Seagulls followed ships like flying garbage disposals, scavenging for scraps, and making themselves perfect targets for pirates who saw them as airborne protein with questionable taste but decent nutritional value. Seagulls were basically feathered idiots with wings, making them the easiest hunting targets pirates could ask for. These noisy birds were surprisingly easy to catch because they had no fear of humans and would land directly on ship decks looking for food. Hunting methods varied depending on available equipment. Nets worked best when large flocks gathered around ships during feeding times. Hook and line techniques adapted regular fishing gear for bird catching. Processing seagulls was messy, unpleasant work that everyone had to learn. Plucking feathers took forever and left people covered in down and bird debris. The meat inside was like unwrapping the world's most disappointing present, revealing tough, oily flesh that tasted like fish mixed with regret. Seagulls spent their lives eating garbage and dead sea creatures, which affected their meat flavor significantly. Cooking required patience because seagull meat was naturally tough and strongly flavored. Most pirates found the taste too intense without heavy seasoning or mixing with other ingredients. Nevertheless, the protein was genuine and valuable despite preparation challenges. When facing food shortages, having any source of fresh meat made the difference between maintaining strength and slowly weakening. The birds themselves were just part of the bounty. What they left behind proved even more valuable. Bird eggs were like finding nature's convenience store on remote islands, offering breakfast, lunch, and dinner all packaged in convenient shells that could be collected by the hundreds during nesting season. Walking into a seabird colony was like entering a grocery store that was incredibly loud and covered in bird droppings everywhere you stepped. Remote islands hosted massive nesting colonies where thousands of birds gathered to lay eggs. Timing was crucial for successful egg collection because pirates needed to arrive when eggs were fresh but before chicks hatched. This required knowledge of local nesting cycles that experienced sailors learned through years of island hopping. Collection was surprisingly easy, but required organization and speed because islands contained more eggs than small crews could possibly transport. Pirates focused on gathering what they could preserve and carry safely. Fresh eggs provided immediate nutrition that could be prepared dozens of different ways. Cooking scrambled eggs for 50 hungry pirates on a beach was like catering a wedding reception for people who hadn't seen real food in months. Preservation techniques allowed crews to extend the value of successful expeditions. Some eggs could be stored in seawater for short periods, while others were hard-boiled and kept in sealed containers. Different bird species produced eggs of various sizes and flavors. The nutritional value was exceptional because bird eggs provided complete protein and essential vitamins often missing from ship-based diets. Natural protein sources from islands were valuable, but back on the ship, other creatures had made themselves at home. Ships attracted cockroaches faster than free food attracts college students, creating thriving insect populations in storage areas that multiplied beyond control and eventually became protein sources for creative pirates. Finding cockroaches in your food supplies was like discovering unwelcome roommates who ate everything and never paid rent. These resilient insects thrived in damp, dark conditions throughout ship storage areas where they bred rapidly. Traditional pest control was largely useless on ships because cats couldn't access tight storage spaces where cockroaches lived. Traps caught some insects but barely affected established populations. When you can't beat them, apparently the solution is to eat them instead. Pirates faced a choice between losing food supplies to insects or finding ways to turn the pest problem into additional protein sources. Preparation required getting past serious mental barriers because most people instinctively avoided eating insects. Starvation has a way of adjusting personal food standards pretty quickly when survival becomes the primary concern. Roasting was the preferred cooking method because it eliminated moisture and created crunchy textures that were more acceptable than soft, squishy insects. The result was like eating the world's worst potato chips, assuming potato chips had legs and moved around on their own. Some crews crushed roasted cockroaches into powder that could be mixed into other foods, providing protein without visual reminders. Nutritionally, insects actually provide complete protein and various minerals that human bodies need for proper function. Eating insects was desperate, but when all organic options ran out, pirates turned to things that weren't supposed to be food at all. Leather goods transformed from useful equipment into emergency nutrition when absolutely nothing else remained, requiring desperate pirates to literally eat their shoes and belts through extended boiling and serious mental preparation. Eating your own footwear represents the ultimate rock bottom moment, but pirates developed techniques for making it survivable. Leather items contained animal proteins that could theoretically keep people alive during extreme famine situations. Preparation was absolutely essential because raw leather was completely inedible and potentially dangerous. The tanning process used chemicals that made leather tough, bitter, and harmful if eaten without proper processing. Boiling was the only way to make leather even remotely safe for consumption. Pieces had to be cut small and boiled in seawater for many hours until they became soft enough to chew without breaking teeth. The cooking process was like making the world's most depressing soup, where the main ingredient used to protect someone's feet from the deck. Multiple changes of water helped remove chemical treatments and improve taste. Even after extensive preparation, leather provided minimal actual nutrition while requiring significant energy to digest. The protein was difficult for human stomachs to process. Sometimes survival depends more on maintaining hope and morale than actual calories consumed. The act of eating anything helped maintain psychological stability during extreme situations. This practice wasn't unique to pirates because other survival situations throughout history recorded people eating leather goods when facing death from hunger. Fortunately, most crews found better alternatives before having to consume their own equipment. When luck struck, pirates could find sources of food that were both massive and surprisingly cooperative. Sea turtles were like floating treasure chests that provided massive amounts of fresh meat, dozens of nutritious eggs, and the incredible advantage of staying alive on deck for weeks without special care or feeding. Catching a sea turtle was like winning the protein lottery, except instead of money, the prize was enough food to feed your entire crew for several days. These large reptiles moved slowly through surface waters, making them relatively easy targets for experienced hunters. Hunting required timing and knowledge of turtle behavior patterns because these creatures surfaced regularly to breathe, creating opportunities for pirates to spot them from significant distances. Female turtles coming ashore to lay eggs were even easier targets. Breaking down something that weighs more than 2 grown men and has armor plating requires serious commitment and proper technique. Processing a large sea turtle was a major project that involved the entire crew working together. The meat itself varied significantly in texture and flavor depending on which part you were eating. Some sections resembled beef, while other portions were tougher and required longer cooking times. Female turtles provided bonus prizes in the form of dozens of eggs, each one offering complete nutrition in a convenient natural package. Fresh turtle eggs were considered genuine delicacies. Storage was where turtles truly excelled as food sources because live turtles could survive on ship decks for weeks, providing fresh meat whenever crews needed it most. These remarkable creatures offered more than just solid food when times got truly desperate. Turtle blood became emergency hydration when fresh water supplies ran dangerously low, providing life-saving fluids that could keep pirates alive in situations where drinking seawater would actually accelerate dehydration and death. Drinking blood sounds like vampire behavior, but for desperate sailors, it was basic survival science applied to life-threatening situations. Human bodies require fresh water to function properly, and seawater contains too much salt to be safely consumed. Turtle blood had the right mineral balance and fluid content to provide actual hydration that human bodies could use effectively. This made it valuable emergency hydration that could mean the difference between survival and death. The taste was metallic and salty, like drinking liquid iron with ocean undertones, which sounds terrible until you realize the alternative is dying of thirst. Fresh turtle blood could be consumed immediately or stored for short periods in sealed containers. The hydration provided was genuine and measurable. Unlike seawater, which forced kidneys to work overtime trying to process excess salt while actually removing water from the body. Some pirates mixed turtle blood with small amounts of fresh water when available, stretching their water supplies while still getting adequate hydration during extended periods without reliable water sources. Storage limitations meant turtle blood had to be used quickly before it coagulated or spoiled, making it a short-term solution rather than long-term water replacement. Beyond emergency hydration, pirates relied on traditional preservation methods. When fresh meat was available, smart pirates knew exactly how to make it last for months. Salted meat formed the backbone of pirate nutrition, transforming fresh beef and pork into leather-tough protein that could survive months at sea without spoiling, though eating it required powerful jaw muscles and realistic expectations. Salt was basically time travel technology for meat preservation, keeping beef and pork edible for months after slaughter, even if the final product had the texture of seasoned shoe leather. The curing process packed meat in layers of coarse salt, drawing out moisture that bacteria needed. Preparation started with high-quality fresh meat obtained during port stops or raids. The meat had to be cut into manageable pieces and completely buried in salt within wooden barrels designed for long-term storage. Every surface needed complete salt coverage because any missed spots would rot and contaminate entire barrels of preserved meat, turning valuable protein into dangerous waste. The curing process took weeks to complete properly and required regular attention. Meat had to be turned periodically with fresh salt added as the original salt dissolved from absorbed moisture. Even after soaking and cooking, eating salted meat was like chewing seasoned leather that occasionally reminded you it used to be actual food. Most pirates soaked pieces in fresh water for hours before cooking, which helped remove excess salt and soften the texture slightly. Cooking methods included long boiling in stews, roasting over flames, and sometimes eating it raw when fuel was too precious to waste. The nutritional value was significant despite challenging preparation and eating experiences. Salted meat was tough to eat, but there was one food that made it look like fine dining by comparison. Hardtack represented the ultimate survival food, engineered to last years without spoiling while providing basic nutrition, though eating these rock-hard biscuits required hammers, patience, and serious commitment to not breaking teeth. These weren't cookies anyone's grandmother would recognize. Hardtack biscuits were more like edible building materials that happened to be made from flour and water. The recipe was deliberately simple to maximize shelf life. Flour, water, salt, and absolutely nothing else that could spoil. Manufacturing required specific techniques to achieve maximum durability. The dough was rolled extremely thin, cut into uniform squares, and baked at high temperatures until every trace of moisture evaporated completely. Properly made hardtack was so hard you could use it for construction projects, which was essentially the whole point of the design. The goal was creating food that could survive any condition ships encountered while remaining technically edible. Eating hardtack straight from storage was nearly impossible without risking serious dental damage. Pirates soaked pieces in water, broth, or whatever liquid was available until softening occurred. Waiting for your food to become chewable was like watching paint dry, except paint drying doesn't determine whether you eat dinner. The softening process could take hours, turning meal preparation into all-day projects. Insect infestation was a constant problem with hardtack stored for extended periods. Pirates learned to tap hardtack against hard surfaces, listening for movement inside. Some crews preferred eating their hardtack with included insects rather than spending time trying to remove all the bugs. Speaking of insects, hardtack wasn't the only place pirates found creatures that could provide unexpected protein. Ship rats were uninvited dinner guests who ended up becoming dinner themselves, providing lean protein for pirates who learned that survival sometimes meant eating creatures that most people would pay exterminators to eliminate. Every ship carried more rats than humans, making them the most renewable protein source available during extended voyages. These rodents thrived in food storage areas, reproducing rapidly while eating anything organic they could find. Trapping required creativity and persistence because ship rats were intelligent, fast, and experienced at avoiding dangerous situations. Pirates used simple cage traps, deadfall contraptions, and sometimes caught rats by hand when cornered. The key to successful rat catching was learning to think like a rat, which wasn't exactly a skill most people wanted to develop. Understanding rat behavior patterns and preferred hiding spots made trapping much more effective. Processing rats was straightforward but psychologically challenging for people who grew up thinking of these animals as disgusting pests rather than potential protein sources. Most pirates removed heads and tails to make the final product less obviously rat-shaped. Rat meat was surprisingly lean and mild-flavored, tasting more like rabbit than the garbage-eating vermin most people imagined. Cooking methods included roasting over open flames, boiling in stews, and sometimes smoking for short-term preservation. Proper cooking eliminated disease risks while creating protein that was actually palatable when prepared correctly. The biggest challenge was overcoming cultural prejudices against eating animals that people typically considered pests. The main difference between eating rats and eating rabbits was psychological rather than nutritional. Animals on ships provided protein, but the ocean itself offered plant-based nutrition that could prevent serious health problems. Seaweed was ocean salad that nobody ordered, but everyone learned to eat, providing essential minerals and fiber when traditional vegetables were impossible to obtain during months-long sea voyages. Collecting seaweed required no hunting skills because it just floated there waiting to be grabbed by anyone with basic coordination. Various types drifted past ships or could be gathered from rocky shores during stops for water and supplies. Pirates learned to recognize edible varieties that provided nutrition without causing digestive problems or poisoning crew members. Some types were clearly better than others for human consumption. Fresh seaweed could be eaten immediately without cooking, though most pirates preferred rinsing it in fresh water to remove excess salt and any small sea creatures attached to the vegetation. Raw seaweed had a texture somewhere between lettuce and rubber, with a taste that reminded everyone exactly where it came from. The flavor was intensely oceanic, like eating concentrated seawater with a chewy consistency. Preparation methods included boiling, drying in sunlight, and mixing with other ingredients to create more palatable combinations. Dried seaweed created preserved vegetation that could be stored for weeks without spoiling. Some varieties could be ground into powder that mixed well with other foods, adding nutrition without overwhelming flavors. Having any source of vegetable nutrition helped prevent some health problems that plagued sailors who ate nothing but protein and carbohydrates for extended periods. The nutritional benefits were significant because seaweed provided minerals, iodine, and fiber that were often completely missing from ship-based diets. Plants from the sea were valuable, but smart pirates also mastered techniques for preserving the creatures they caught. Sun-dried fish represented one of the most reliable protein preservation methods available to pirates, transforming fresh catches into leather-tough nutrition that could last weeks without refrigeration, though eating it required soaking and strong teeth. Fresh fish turned into edible jerky through the magic of salt air and relentless sunshine, creating protein that could survive tropical heat and ocean humidity without spoiling. The preservation process required perfect timing, decent weather, and knowledge of techniques that turned perishable catches into long-term nutrition. The drying process started immediately after catching fish, because any delay allowed spoilage to begin. Pirates gutted fish quickly, removing internal organs that would rot and contaminate the meat during the drying period. Salt played a crucial role in successful fish preservation. Fish pieces were covered in salt or soaked in concentrated salt water before being laid out for drying. Laying fish out in tropical sunshine was like operating an outdoor dehydrator that ran on solar power and ocean breezes. The process required several days of direct sunlight and good air circulation to remove enough moisture for safe preservation. Protection from insects and seabirds was essential during the drying period. Pirates used nets and constant vigilance to protect their drying protein from scavengers. The final product resembled leather more than fish, requiring significant preparation before consumption. Dried fish had to be soaked in water for hours to restore enough moisture for safe chewing. The technique was so effective that one successful fishing day could provide protein for weeks, assuming the weather cooperated. Pirates who mastered fish preservation gained significant advantages during extended ocean travel through reliable nutrition planning. Fish preservation was valuable, but occasionally pirates encountered protein sources that dwarfed everything else they had ever eaten. Horses and livestock became emergency protein sources only during the most desperate circumstances, when captured animals from raids or transport vessels provided massive amounts of fresh meat that could feed entire crews for weeks. Eating horses was considered the absolute last resort, reserved for situations where starvation was imminent and no other food sources remained available. These situations were rare but documented, occurring when ships captured livestock during raids or when transported animals became emergency nutrition. The decision to slaughter horses or livestock was never made lightly because these animals represented significant value beyond their meat. Horses were expensive, useful for transportation, and could be sold for substantial profits at the right ports. When facing genuine starvation, however, even the most valuable horse becomes less important than keeping your crew alive to see another day. Pirates made practical decisions based on immediate survival needs versus potential future profits. Processing large animals required the entire crew working together with sharp tools and proper techniques for handling massive amounts of fresh meat. A single horse could provide hundreds of pounds of protein that had to be preserved quickly before spoilage occurred. The meat quality was excellent compared to most other emergency food sources pirates encountered. Horse meat was lean, flavorful, and familiar in texture, making it much more palatable than many alternatives. One horse could solve food problems for weeks, providing enough preserved protein to sustain entire crews during long voyages where other food sources were unavailable. The nutritional impact was enormous compared to smaller protein sources. The fact that pirates were willing to eat their own transportation shows just how serious survival at sea could become. These extreme examples represent the absolute limits of human desperation when facing death in the middle of nowhere.